Okay. The woman looked like she'd been wrung out by the land and hung up to dry. That was the first thing Nora Calloway thought when she saw her standing at the gate. Not begging, not crying, just standing there with a canvas bag over one shoulder and both hands visible, which out here in the hill country of West Texas in 1883 was either a sign of good manners or good sense, and in Nora's experience, those two things were often the same. Nora was 67 years old and had been running the Callaway spread alone for 14 months, since her husband Roy had gone out to check the north fence line on a February morning and come back across the saddle of his own horse. Heart? The doctor said, as if that explained anything, as if a man's heart just decided one Tuesday to stop without asking anyone's permission. She had 2 children. Her son Dale lived in San Antonio and sent letters at Christmas that were really just excuses explaining why he couldn't come. Her daughter had married a man in St. Louis who believed that Texas was something that happened to other people. Neither of them had offered to come back. Neither of them had asked whether she could manage. She was managing. Barely. The way you manage when you are too stubborn to admit that the thing you are doing is beyond you. The woman at the gate had not knocked, had not called out. She was simply standing there the way a person stands when they have learned not to assume that any door will open for them. Nora set down her coffee and went to see. Up close, she was younger than she looked from the window. 25, maybe 26, with dark hair pulled back under a hat that had seen better years and a face that was composed in the careful way of someone who has decided not to show anything until they know what kind of place they've arrived at. She was lean in the way that means work, not hunger, though there was some of that too. Her boots were good ones, well made but worn down to the heel, and she carried herself straight despite the canvas bag, which by the look of it held everything she owned. She met Nora's eyes directly. That was the first thing. "Ma'am," she said, "I'm sorry to come up unannounced. I've been walking from Haskell since yesterday morning." She didn't offer that as an excuse, just a fact. "I can see you're running cattle." She glanced toward the far pasture, briefly, like a person checking a thing they already knew. "I can also see your windmill's been sitting idle and your south tank looks low. If your pump rod's bent, which it looks like from here, you're going to lose what's left of your water reserve before the week's out." Nora looked at her. "I know windmills," the woman said. "I know cattle and horses, and I know range work. I'm not looking for wages. Just a place to sleep and meals while I work. If I'm not useful inside a week, I'll leave without argument." There was a silence in which a crow called from somewhere in the post oaks, and a cow answered it with a kind of contempt only cattle can manage. "What's your name?" Nora said. "Mae Sutton." "Where are you from, Mae Sutton?" A pause that was only a half second but contained something. "North of Abilene originally. I've been working ranches since I was 17. "That's not an answer to what I asked." Mae looked at her steadily. "No, ma'am, it isn't." Nora studied her for a long moment. In 67 years, she had developed a reliable sense for dishonesty. It lived somewhere behind her sternum and pulled tight when a person was lying, the way a rope pulls when the weight on the other end is wrong. She felt no such pull now. What she felt instead was something she couldn't quite name, a kind of recognition that had nothing to do with having met this person before. She was about to say no. She had said no to 2 men last spring who come looking for work and had the same look of road-worn practicality about them. One of them had been fine. One of them had made off with her good bridle and a saddle blanket, and she hadn't known which he'd be until it was too late. She opened the gate. "Windmill's around back," she said. "Let me see what you can do." What Mae Sutton could do with a windmill turned out to be considerable. She had the access panel off in under 3 minutes, diagnosed the problem, bent pump rod, just as she'd said, and a cracked leather seal on the cylinder that Nora hadn't known about, and had the whole mechanism disassembled on a spread canvas in less time than it had taken Nora to locate the spare rod in the equipment shed. She worked with the efficient, unhurried precision of someone who has done this particular task many times in many conditions and has long since stopped thinking about the steps and started thinking only about the result. By mid-afternoon, the windmill was turning and the south tank was filling, and Mae Sutton was washing her hands at the pump with the matter-of-fact air of a person who has done what they said they'd do and doesn't need anyone to remark on it. Nora remarked on it anyway. "Where did you learn windmills?" "My father." Mae dried her hands on her canvas bag. "He was a well driller before he switched to ranching. Said if you understood water, you understood everything else." A pause. "He was right about most things." Nora noted the past tense and didn't follow it. "Supper's at 7, she said. "I don't keep a late table." "Yes, ma'am." "The tack room in the barn has a cot and a stove. It's not much." "It's more than I had last night." There was no self-pity in the way she said it. It was simply a true thing, stated plainly, which Nora found she appreciated more than she might have expected. Mae ate supper that first night without excess conversation, which Nora also appreciated. She answered what she was asked 2 questions about the ranch, which pastures Roy had favored in dry summers, where the good water ran in the creek bottom, and then helped clear the table without being invited to. Questions about the land, Nora thought, watching her. The kind a person asks when they're trying to learn a place, not curious the way a traveler is curious. The way someone is curious when they want to understand something they intend to be responsible for. She didn't let herself think about what that meant. In the weeks that followed, Mae Sutton proved useful in the way that certain people are useful, not through effort or performance, but through an almost uncanny ability to see what needed doing and do it before it became a crisis. She found a section of fence on the east boundary that had been compromised by a downed cedar and would have let the whole north herd wander into the neighboring property before another month was out. She noticed that 2 of the cows were showing early signs of foot rot and treated them without being asked, using a remedy that Nora's husband Roy had sworn by and that she hadn't seen anyone else use in years. She was good with horses in a particular way, the way of someone who communicates with animals not through force or technique, but through a kind of patient attention that the horses seemed to recognize and respond to. Nora's mare, a contrary roan named Patience, who had been living up to her name sarcastically since Roy died, allowed Mae to handle her feet on the 3rd day, which she had not allowed Roy to do in 6 months of trying. Nora watched this from the fence and said nothing, but she thought about it. At supper, Mae was quiet in a way that was neither unfriendly nor closed. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, it was precise. No more words than the thought required. She had opinions about range management and water rights and the particular challenges of running cattle in a dry summer, and the opinions were not academic. They came from someone who had learned these things by being wrong about them first. There was something else, though. Something Nora kept circling without landing on. Mae Sutton never talked about where she'd come from. Not evasively, not with the sharp deflections of a person hiding something criminal, just the gentle steering of conversation that people do when a subject is still too raw to be handled directly. North of Abilene. Working ranches since 17, the past tense when she mentioned her father. 7 years of silence in those few sentences. 7 years that had turned a rancher's daughter into a woman walking alone across West Texas with a canvas bag and the particular self-contained composure of someone who has learned not to need things from people who might not give them. One evening in October, with the first real cold settling in and the fire going in the front room, Nora set down her mending and said, "Tell me about your father's ranch, Mae." Mae was quiet for a moment, looking at the fire the way people look at fires when they are deciding how honest to be. "He built it himself," she said finally. "Took him 20 years. Outside of Merkel, about 400 acres, good water, good grass. He raised Hereford cattle and some horses on the side." She paused. "He died 4 years ago? Left it to me." "You were running it alone?" "For 2 years. I was 22 when he died." She looked at her hands. "I thought I could do it. I was wrong about some things. Not the ranching. I knew the ranching. But there was a man, a business arrangement my father had made that I didn't know the full terms of, a grazing lease with a man named Calloway." She caught herself. Different Calloways. Nora nodded. "The lease, Had a buyout clause my father had never exercised because he'd always planned to. When he died, the clause triggered, and I didn't have the cash to cover it. I borrowed against the property to raise it." She stopped, started again, more carefully. "I was young, and I trusted the banker my father had used, and I signed papers I didn't read carefully enough. By the spring of '81, the bank had the land, and I had what I could carry." The fire crackled. "I've been moving since," Mae said, "working where I can, sending a little money back." She looked up. "I still owe the bank. That's the truth of it. I'm not running from anyone. I owe money I lost fair and square through my own ignorance, and I am working to pay it back." Nora picked up her mending. "You've been punishing yourself for 2 years for being 22 and trusting the wrong man," she said. Mae looked at her. "That's not a character flaw," Nora said. "That's youth. The two are easily confused, but they are not the same thing." Mae was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was careful. "Most people don't see it that way. Most people," Nora said, "are not as smart as they believe they are about what they would have done differently." There was a silence that was not uncomfortable. Outside, the wind moved through the post oaks, and the cattle were quiet in the near pasture, and the old house settled around them the way old houses do. The particular creaks and shifts that sound like complaints, but are really just the voice of a structure that has decided, after all this time, to keep standing. It was 3 weeks after that conversation when Cole Birch came. Nora knew the name before she knew the face. Cole Birch had been approaching her through intermediaries for the better part of a year, a lawyer's letter first, then a man who called himself a land agent, then another man who was plainly not a land agent, but who wore his purpose in the set of his jaw and the way his eyes moved across her property with the calculating attention of someone taking inventory of a thing he intends to own. The Calloway spread was good land, and everybody in 3 counties knew that Roy Calloway was dead, and his widow was 67 years old, and her water situation was precarious. Precarious was the word Cole Birch liked to use. He had used it in the lawyer's letter. He had used it with the land agent. It was a soft word, a helpful-sounding word, the word of a man who wanted to be seen as solving a problem rather than creating one. He came on a Tuesday morning with 2 men she didn't know and the particular confident ease of someone who has arrived at a conclusion and merely needs to inform the other party. Mae was at the barn when she saw them coming up the road. She came to the house, not at a run, but with the brisk, purposeful stride of someone who has assessed a situation and made a decision about it. "You know those men?" she said. Nora was already at the window. "The one in front has been trying to buy this land for a year." Mae was quiet for a moment. "Is he the kind who takes no for an answer?" "He has not been so far." Mae looked at her. "Let me talk to them." Mae, I know men like this." Her voice was level. "I've made the mistake of not knowing what I was dealing with. I don't make it twice." She paused. "Please." There was something in the way she said it. Not bravado, not anger. The focused, quiet determination of a person who has identified a wrong they are in a position to address and has decided that declining to address it would be its own kind of failure. Nora stepped back from the door. Mae walked to the fence line without hurrying, without reaching for anything, without performing any of the theater that men in this situation usually performed. She simply walked, straight and unhurried, and stopped at the gate with her hands at her sides, and looked up at Cole Birch on his horse with the calm directness of someone who finds nothing about this situation unexpected. Birch was a thick-built man in a good hat, with the soft confidence of someone who has been agreed with for a long time. He looked at Mae the way men sometimes look at a woman who has appeared between them and the thing they want, with a patience that was really just a more polished form of dismissal. "I'm here to see Nora Calloway," he said. "Mrs. Calloway isn't available. I manage operations here. If you have business with the Calloway spread, you have business with me." A beat. "And who are you?" "Mae Sutton. I've been running this ranch with Mrs. Calloway since September." She let a moment pass. "Your name?" He told her, which was a small mistake, because it confirmed that he had expected to be recognized. "Mr. Birch," Mae said. I'm familiar with your letters. I'm familiar with your land agent, and I'm familiar with your other man who came in August. She looked at him steadily. I'm familiar with the method. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not retreat. Reassessment. The ranch is not producing what it should, he said. The tone was reasonable, almost gentle. Mrs. Calloway is managing alone. Winter is coming, and the water situation is. The water situation, Mae said, has been resolved. The windmill is running, the south tank is full, and I've identified 2 additional spring sites on the east section that haven't been developed. If you've been waiting for the water situation to make this place unworkable, you've been waiting for something that isn't going to happen. One of Birch's men shifted in the saddle. The offer I'm prepared to make is a fair one, Birch said. More than market given the Calloway spread is not for sale. Mae's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Mrs. Calloway has operated this land for over 30 years. She intends to continue operating it. If you'd like to confirm that in writing, I'll give you the name of her attorney in Abilene. Birch looked at her for a long moment. He was a man who was accustomed to the particular leverage that came from a woman alone on a piece of land with no one to back her up. He was recalculating now, visibly, the way men recalculate when the variable they hadn't accounted for turns out to be significant. You're a hired hand, he said finally, and there was something underneath it, a testing quality. The last card of a man who has run out of the polite ones. I'm the person standing at this fence, Mae said, telling you that this conversation is finished. Come back with a lawyer if you feel you have legal standing. Otherwise, I'd ask you to move along. The 2 flanking men looked at each other. Birch looked at Mae for a long moment. Then he looked past her, at the house, at the window where Nora stood watching, and at something in Nora's face or posture that apparently told him what he needed to know. This isn't settled, he said. I expect not, Mae said. When you're ready to settle it properly, you know where to find us. Birch turned his horse. The 3 of them rode back down the road, and the dust settled behind them, and Mae stood at the fence until they were gone, not from stubbornness, but from the same instinct that makes you watch a weather front until you're sure which direction it's moving. Then she turned around. Nora was on the porch. She had Roy's rifle in the crook of her arm, and she was looking at Mae with an expression that Mae couldn't quite read until she got closer. It was the expression of someone who has not felt safe in a long time and has just, without expecting it, felt safe. That night, Nora did something she had not done since the February morning they'd brought Roy home across his horse's back. She opened the good coffee, the beans from San Antonio that she'd been saving with the vague intention of saving them for something, though she'd never been able to name what, and she made 2 cups and brought them to the front room, and set one in front of Mae without asking. They sat for a while without speaking, which had become a kind of language between them, one of those silences that is not empty, but full of everything that doesn't need saying out loud. He'll come back, Mae said. He will. Then we should file the operations partnership with the county before he does. Makes the standing clearer. Nora turned her coffee cup in her hands. I've been thinking about something since September, she said, since you fixed the windmill without being asked, since you noticed the foot rot before it spread. She paused. Since you learned every water source on this property in 3 weeks like you were studying for an examination. Mae was quiet. Roy and I built this ranch from nothing, Nora said. 40 years. We had a plan for it, what it would be after us. Dale isn't coming back. Miriam. She stopped. Miriam has her own life, and she's made her peace with the fact that this place was never going to be part of it. She looked at the fire. I am 67 years old, and I cannot work this land the way it needs working, and I know that, and the hardest part of knowing it has been not knowing what it means for this place when I'm gone. Mae said nothing. She was listening with the full attention of someone who understands that some things require you to simply be present for them. I want to make you an offer, Nora said. She laid it out plainly, the way she laid out everything, a formal partnership arrangement, 30% of the operation, not wages. The use of the land as collateral to settle Mae's debt in Abilene, paid back over time due the operation's earnings, first right to purchase the remaining stake when the time came, at a price set now in writing, not later when Nora was in a weaker position to negotiate. "And the debt you owe the bank," Nora said, "is not a favor. It's an investment. I've watched you work for 6 weeks. I know what you're worth." Mae looked at the table. Then she looked up, and her eyes were wet, and she didn't look away or try to compose herself. She simply let it be there, the way an honest person lets a true thing be visible. "Why?" she asked. "You don't know me." "I know enough," Nora said. "I know you walked here from Haskell, and the first thing you noticed was my windmill. I know you handled patients inside 3 days, and she let Roy work on her teeth for a year and never once allowed it." She paused. "I know that when Colbert rode up with 2 men behind him, you went to that fence without being asked, and you didn't raise your voice once. And I know." She stopped. Started again more carefully. "I know that you ask about this land the way a person asks about something they intend to be responsible for." Mae was quiet for a long time. "I lost my father's land," she said. "I think about that every day." "I know you do. I don't want to lose anything else." "Then don't," Nora said simply. "Stay. Work it right. Don't sign anything you haven't read." And for the first time since September, Mae Sutton smiled. It was a careful smile, the smile of someone who has learned not to trust good things too quickly, but it was real. It reached her eyes. "I'll earn it," she said. "I already know that," Nora said. "That's why I'm asking." Cole Birch came back in December with a lawyer from Sweetwater and a document that had been written by someone who knew how to make theft look like paperwork. He found Mae at the fence line and Nora at the barn door, and a recorded partnership deed filed with the county courthouse in Abilene 3 weeks prior. Mae said, "The Calloway Sutton Ranch operation is not subject to any outstanding purchase offers. All future inquiries should be directed to our attorney." She wrote down the name and address on a piece of paper and handed it through the fence. "He's been expecting to hear from you." Birch looked at Nora. Nora looked back at him with the unhurried patience of a woman who has spent 40 years watching weather and knows that most storms, if you wait them out, eventually move on. Birch left. He did not come back. The winter was hard in the particular way that West Texas winters are hard. Not the killing cold of the north, but the grinding kind, the cold that gets into the bones of old buildings and old livestock and tests whether everything has been maintained well enough to hold. The water lines froze twice. A section of the barn roof gave way under an ice load and had to be rebuilt from the purlins up. 2 calves came early and had to be kept in the house for a week, which Nora bore with the exasperated equanimity of a woman who had done it before and would do it again, and had made her peace with the fact that ranching was exactly as inconvenient as it chose to be. Mae worked through all of it without complaint, which Nora noticed, and without needing to be told what to do, which Nora noticed more. By the time March came and the bluebonnets started on the south slope and the creek ran clear again through the live oaks, something had changed at the Calloway spread that was difficult to name but unmistakable to feel. The place had a weight to it again, not the weight of grief, though that was still there. Nora still walked up to the little rise behind the barn some evenings and stood for a while with Roy, saying the things that are said in those particular silences, the ones between a person and a piece of their life that they carry forward instead of putting down. Grief doesn't leave. It learns to share the house. But there were other things now. The sound of 2 women at breakfast, talking over the day's work and the week's weather and the price of feed, the sound of Mae singing to herself in the barn in the mornings, unconsciously, the way a person sings when they've stopped performing their contentment and simply arrived at it, the sound of Patience, who had never been patient, who had been misnamed from birth, nickering when she heard Mae's step in the yard, which she did for no one else on earth, the sound of a place that had found its footing. On a warm afternoon in April, Nora found Mae sitting on the top rail of the south pasture fence, watching the cows move through the new grass in the long light. She climbed up beside her, which her knees made an opinion about, and they sat for a while without speaking. "You wrote to someone," Nora said. She had seen the envelope on the table that morning, addressed in Mae's careful hand to somewhere in Merkel. "The woman who bought my father's land from the bank. Mae was quiet for a moment. "I've been wanting to write her for 2 years. Never knew what to say." "What did you say?" "That I hoped she was taking care of the water." A pause. "That my father had loved the place and I was glad it was with someone." She looked at her hands. "It took me a long time to get there. Being glad about it, but I am." Nora looked out at the pasture. At the south fence line, straight and solid, every post set right. At the windmill turning steady in the afternoon wind. At the water tank, full and clean, reflecting the April sky. "When Roy and I came here," she said, "we had nothing but each other and a piece of land that didn't believe in us yet. The first 2 years I thought we had made a terrible mistake." She paused. "But we had something." Mae looked at her. "Somewhere to put our hands," Nora said. "Somewhere that needed us and would show us the results of our work. Somewhere that would tell us the truth about ourselves, because land always does. It doesn't flatter you. It just shows you what you've done." She looked at Mae. "That changes a person, having somewhere that tells you the truth." Below them the cattle moved through the new grass, unhurried, and the windmill turned, and somewhere in the live oaks a bird called once and wasn't answered, and called again. "I know," Mae said. She did. She had known it, she thought, since the morning she'd walked up a road with a canvas bag and a debt she couldn't see the end of, and an old woman had opened a gate before she'd finished asking. You don't always recognize the moment a thing turns around. Sometimes you're in the middle of it before you know the turning has happened, but it turns. I keep coming back to the moment Mae walked up to that gate with a canvas bag and both hands visible, and I think about what it actually took to do that. Not the walking. The walking from Haskell is no small thing, but the showing up, the asking. After everything she'd lost, after 2 years of moving and working and carrying a debt that wasn't entirely her fault but that she'd decided was entirely her responsibility, she still had the ability to look at a broken windmill from the road and say, "I can fix that. I know how to be useful here." That's not a small thing. That's everything. What strikes me about Mae's story is that her losses didn't make her hard or dishonest. She lost her father's land because she was young and trusted the wrong man and signed papers she hadn't read carefully enough. She could have spent the rest of her life bitter about that, about the banker, about the clause in the lease, about the timing. Most people would have. But Mae made a different choice. She decided that what had happened to her was partly her own failure, and she was going to learn from it and pay back what she owed and keep moving until she found somewhere worth stopping. That kind of honesty about yourself, when it would be so easy to blame everything on someone else, is one of the hardest things a person can do. It's also the thing that made Nora trust her, because Nora was watching. Nora had been burned before. She'd seen men come through and take what wasn't theirs and leave. She had every reason to say no. But what she saw in Mae wasn't desperation or manipulation. She saw someone who had looked at a broken windmill and diagnosed it correctly before she'd even been invited through the gate. She saw someone who fixed things the right way, not the fast way. Someone who asked about the water and the pasture because she was building a map in her head of a place she wanted to be responsible for. That's the part I think about most. Mae didn't just show up with her hands. She showed up with her mind. She used what she knew. The windmills her father had taught her, the range work she'd done across 7 years of ranches, the understanding of land and water that came from losing her own, and she applied it with a precision that no amount of good intentions could have replaced. Good character without skill is just good wishes. What Mae had was both. And it was the combination that changed Nora's answer from no to come around back and show me what you can do. And then there's what happened at the fence with Cole Birch. Mae didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten. She just knew what she was dealing with, because she had dealt with men like that before in a different form. And she had learned the lesson that time. She stood there and she was precise and she was unafraid and she told the truth in a way that left no room for negotiation. That's not stubbornness. That's someone who has been tested enough times to know what they're made of. I think about Mae sitting on that fence rail in April watching the cattle move through the new grass, and I wonder if she knew in that moment how far she'd come. Not in miles, she'd come a long way in miles, but in the other direction, from someone who had lost everything and kept moving because stopping felt like admitting it, to someone who had found a place that told her the truth about herself and decided that the truth was something she could live with. That's the only finish line that matters. Not the one where everything is perfect, the one where you finally stop running from what you got wrong and start building something from what you know.